The events unfolding in the small back alley square had, by then, drawn a crowd of people. Some had come from the surrounding alleys, while many others occupied the windows looking down into the dimly lit area. They looked on in silence as the heartfelt sobs of the woman continued, seemingly unwilling to disturb the scene playing out before them. From her place behind the impromptu stage, Ludmilla silently digested the events leading up to the scene before her. Until that moment, she was unable to make very little sense of their course so far. The reason why this highborn lady, who had a direct connection to the king, would walk halfway around the city to some forgotten back alley on the border of the slums had been a complete mystery. The revelation that Lady Shiltier was a divine cast to shed some light on the questions that had continued to rise in Ludmilla's mind. It would not be uncharacteristic for a priest to come and minister to the people. Were her attendants clad in their fine, alabaster garments acolytes? Their uniform appearance lent credence to this thought. The light, almost sheer cloth of her attendants' garb could perhaps be found in much warmer regions of the world. The black gown and bolero of Lady Shiltier with its silver and carmine highlights, however, did not match the vestments of any faith she had ever encountered or read of. What manner of priest is she? She wondered to herself. Cleric. Lady Shiltier's voice snapped Ludmilla out of her thoughts and she focused her attention on her. Cleric, the correction came again, not priest. It was then that she realized that, at some point, she had voiced her thoughts aloud. Though the words had caused her to go silent once again, she couldn't hide the dubious expression that painted her face. Clerics were a part of the priesthood of every religion she knew of. Though they were often trained and specialized for the battlefield, they usually did not mind being called priests. Looking at the back of the slight figure before her, she could not imagine a woman so much smaller than herself standing at the forefront of pitched combat, bolstering her allies and delivering divine wrath upon her enemies. "But surely you are here to minister to the people?" Ludmilla asked. This was the first time since they had encountered one another that Ludmilla had Lady Shiltier's attention, so she quickly brushed aside her doubts at the previous statement to press her with questions. As Bohadan had tended to the needs of her village, so too did the priesthoods of larger towns and cities serve their own populations. They gave spiritual guidance, performed charity, and though they legally held no political power in Riestais, the temples had a degree of cultural influence and certain rites concerning the use of divine magic. She voiced her query, and Lady Shiltier's posture stiffened momentarily. A short silence ensued. The fan, which she had been waving lazily in front of her face, snapped shut. She turned smoothly with her head tilted slightly, the silken folds of her dress swirling around her. Though Ludmilla had mentally braced herself after seeing the cleric laying hands on the battered and sick prostitute, she felt herself take in a sharp breath as what she now saw rooted her feet to the ground. As with Nobbe of Darkness, Lady Shiltier had two appearances. The first was that of a peerless beauty, far beyond that of Nobbe, something that Ludmilla would not have believed possible were she not witnessing it herself. The cleric's luxurious silver hair had been tied up in an off-center ponytail that spilled down the length of her back. Long, lazy ringlets fell about a delicate face of perfect frame, clear and bright crimson eyes turned up towards her beneath long, silver lashes. In vibrant contrast to pale skin reminiscent of a porcelain doll, her cheeks were flushed with life while small, soft lips parted with the hint of an alluring smile. It was a bewitching appearance that anyone would fall to, any feelings of jealousy or envy swept aside by adulation and longing. Wealth and power beyond all reason would be squandered to obtain even a moment of her favor. She was possessed of a legendary beauty that could topple nations and spark wars that set the world aflame, and the world would gladly become ashes for her sake. But even as Ludmilla stood entranced by this vision, her talent made her aware of a second, horrifying appearance that lurked beneath the first. Like the arm she had seen previously, pallid flesh was stretched over a face that invoked a dark and primal fear from deep within her. Her mouth, parted in a ghastly smile, was impossibly wide with pale lips stretched thinly around it. All around the inside of her mouth lay row upon row of wickedly curved, needle-sharp teeth, much like the lampreys that would occasionally be found latched to sides of fish caught from the river. A long red tongue writhed sinuously within, running over the carpet of teeth like a fleshy rasp. Glowing crimson eyes shone from within their dark hollows, and Ludmilla felt like nothing more than helpless prey. Even the lustrous silver strands that framed her face seemed about to move on their own. As Ludmilla stood transfixed by what she saw, Lady Shiltier seemed to be gauging her reaction. The corner of Lady Shultier's mouth twitched, and when it seemed that nothing more would be forthcoming from the girl standing rigid before her, she straightened from her coy posture to speak. "It is the will of Ain Zul'Gaun, the Sorcerer King, that his domain stands as a beacon of prosperity and harmony for all the world to see." Lady Shiltier's answer was clearly not only for Ludmilla, and her soft, lilting voice chimed lightly across the square. "By the grace of His Majesty, you are afforded protection as his citizens." The arm holding the closed fan swept out over the onlookers surrounding the square as she turned away from Ludmilla with a grand gesture. Her feminine figure swayed seductively in the light of the braziers as she made her way back to the center of the plaza. By this point Ludmilla could see a throng of people gathered in their surroundings. Even the rooftops had people looking down from them. Lady Shiltier's pace slowed as she came back to stand near the stacked crates again. The heeled prostitute had collected herself and knelt with her companions. The cleric's gaze surveyed the surroundings before finally coming to rest on the wooden containers before her. Following that gaze, Ludmilla saw that a meager-looking plant had been laid on the corner of one of the boxes. With small flowers of white and yellow, she recognized it as one which commonly grew out of the cracks in the pavement and masonry of the city. Producing a silken handkerchief, Lady Shiltier gently picked up the flower, placing it on the cloth to be folded within. Then, while holding the humble tribute in her left hand, she raised her right. Gate. A hole opened in the air behind where the boxes lay. It was similar to the one that had appeared in the warehouse in Warden's Vale. Wide enough for several grown men to fit shoulder to shoulder and just as high, it hovered silently in inky darkness. The acolyte with the pen and clipboard came to stand before Lady Shiltier. "Pandora's actor will know what to do with this," the cleric said as she handed the wrapped flower over to her attendant, who had her palms held out to receive it. Lady Shiltier's hand motioned lazily at the crates in a dismissive gesture. "Return these." As she turned away, another attendant came to pick up one of the crates. The hollow sound it made as it bumped against the others upon leaving the ground suggested that it was empty. Falling in line with the other acolyte with the clipboard, they stepped forward into the hole in the air and disappeared. After a moment, the acolytes reappeared with identical crates, but they made a more solid noise as they were set down in place of the ones that had been carried away. Back and forth the attendants went, not seeming to tire or mind their burden. As the crowd looked on, the attendants eventually refilled the space formerly occupied by the empty crates, neatly arranging them behind Lady Shiltier. "It is the will of His Majesty that his people shall not want for shelter or provision." The end of Lady Shiltier's sentence was punctuated with a thump as the last of the crates settled on the ground behind her. "It is His will that His people are provided with the security and stability to thrive, regardless of their ability, occupation or station." As Lady Shiltier once again wove around the plaza, her swaying movements and graceful steps seemed almost a dance, more suited to the polished floors of a palace court than the dirt and puddles of the alley. The rich silks of her black ballroom gown swept over the ground and the sweet sound of her voice filled the square. Those watching stood transfixed by the vision made manifest before them. It was as if they had found themselves transported into a song of legend and they were witnessing a noble of the highest caliber. Their cramped and dirty alley had been transformed into the grand courts of some far-flung empire, where the lady before them was delivering not a message to the riffraff of a city conquered, but a proclamation to the heads of great houses and rulers sitting on their thrones. In one hand she held healing and salvation, in the other she offered peace, prosperity and the hope for a greater future. As she spoke, the attendants had all returned and opened the newly arrived crates. They revealed food, staples, vegetables and cuts of meat. Others contained bolts of flax and linen, balls of wool yarn and spools of plain thread. Coal and charcoal could be seen filling others still, as well as logs of wood and kindling. A great plenitude of life's necessities were arrayed behind Lady Shiltier as she continued to speak, adding a simple-to-understand weight to her words. "Those who strive to serve under his rule shall be rewarded in equal measure." Lady Shiltier rested her hand on the shoulder of the woman she had tended to. "Those that would dare to bring harm to what is his shall be granted no quarter." She beckoned for an acolyte to come forward with her free hand. Immediately, one of the gorgeous women clad in alabaster silks stepped before her and deeply bowed. The one that did this, Lady Shiltier's voice could be heard clearly across the square as she issued instructions. "Find him, and bring him here." The woman raised her head, and Ludmilla thought she saw a predatory gleam in her dark eyes before she turned away. walking straight towards the edge of the crowd on the opposite side of the square. It took a moment for the bystanders to realize that the last words they heard had been an order, but upon this realization a disturbance arose from the direction the woman was walking towards. The crowd turned their heads. A small opening formed in the wall of people, revealing a tall, lanky man with the appearance of a common laborer. He had already taken several steps, trying to shove through the crowd, but it was too late. Hold species. The man froze completely mid-step, magically paralyzed by Lady Shultier's spell, his arms held out in front of him as he was trying to push his way through the wall of people in the way. Those around him did not even have enough time to register what had happened as the acolyte scooped him up entirely, carrying the man like a hollow wooden mannequin back to her mistress with no more visible effort than she had shown when she delivered the filled crates. Lady Shultier nodded as she opened a new gate. The man was still frozen as he was carried off to some unknown fate. The spellbound feeling over the crowd had partially broken due to the commotion, but the cleric's declarations still echoed in their minds. Lady Shultier had rejected the notion that she was a priest, but what had transpired delivered a message more powerful than any sermon Ludmilla had ever attended. As she looked around the plaza at the faces in the crowd, all those present had clearly been moved by her words. No, rather than moved, something had taken root. Though Lady Shultier's unveiled appearance had tempered Ludmilla's reception somewhat in her own eyes, she still felt the lingering appeal of her words. A colder, more calculating part of her mind reared up in alarm. An ember had been instilled in the hearts of the people here, and from deep in the lowly alleys of Irantal, it would spread and perhaps set all its citizens aflame with the evening's message. It was something many a noble both sought and feared at the same time, something that could become extraordinarily dangerous if it flew out of control. As she watched the people slowly disperse, the attendants had taken up positions in the middle of the plaza, distributing the supplies to the queues that had formed after their mistress had retired from the stage. Charity was also a component of various faiths, but the sheer abundance before her would have beggared even the largest of city temples before long. As Ludmilla watched them work, she felt a presence brush up near her. Baroness Aradnik. Ludmilla looked down at the familiar voice and her body jumped. Most of what appeared below her was a yawning pit of needle-sharp teeth. She was only thankful that she didn't cry out as well. Lady Shultier's slight stature certainly allowed her to move about without being noticed, if she wasn't purposely drawing attention to herself. Ludmilla had a great many things to ask of her, but everything she had thought of seemed to want to come out at the same time, resulting in her mouth opening wordlessly and not much else. The cleric in the black gown seemed amused by her reaction, and wrapped a hand lightly around Ludmilla's elbow. "Let us speak privately elsewhere." The pair appeared at the same gazebo that Ludmilla had arrived in alongside Moman and Nobbe earlier that day. Night had fully fallen over Irantal, and the cool air was refreshing after being in the crowded atmosphere of the smoky alley plaza. The wide open space under the clear night sky had a relaxing effect on Ludmilla as she stepped off the platform behind Lady Shultier, who had let go of her arm after they had arrived. "This gazebo appears to be quite popular," Ludmilla said casually while stretching. As the words left her mouth, she realized the sort of sloppy appearance she was putting on, not to mention speaking out of turn with a member of the royal court. Her heart sunk as she brought a hand to her mouth at her own rude behavior. All of her efforts to organize proper protocol her mind seemed to have been for naught. That place is the only spot where teleportation isn't prevented here." Lady Shultier peered around the grounds as she responded to Ludmilla's words, not even bothering to turn around before speaking. Ludmilla blinked several times upon hearing this. While she had not even known of the existence of teleportation magic before today, never mind that it could be restricted, it didn't seem like such a good idea to reveal security measures openly in public. Perhaps it wasn't as important as she felt it was. Lady Shultier's voice had lost its formal tone, leaving only her light, lilting voice that seemed not too much different from a young woman around her own age. Ludmilla wondered if it meant that she herself could relax and put formalities aside, or perhaps Lady Shultier was graciously covering for Ludmilla's breach in protocol. Deciding that it would be for the best to not to press her luck, Ludmilla remained silent as she followed behind her, resolving herself once again to demonstrate the proper decorum. Lady Shultier's attendants had been left behind to distribute supplies to the crowd of people in the plaza, so they walked alone together through the empty streets of the central district. Several of the guest houses they passed had dim lighting that filtered through their windows, so it seemed that the nobles' meeting had adjourned. She would have to find some way to catch up on everything. They crossed several intersections, circling around partway behind the royal villa, before Lady Sheltier turned and headed into the yard of what looked to be an unoccupied guest house. Ludmilla stopped at the gate to look up at the building. It was fashioned in line with the same themes as the rest of the homes in the central district. Unlike the wattle and daub construction of the buildings in the common area, these were sculpted primarily from limestone to match the aesthetic of the royal villa and the nearby administrative offices. Rather than a simple guest house, it was in reality a large manor, roughly 10 times larger than the baronial manor in Warden's Vale, its wooden hall included. There was a letterbox with the number 04 on it just inside the entrance of the yard, and the Lady Sheltier was tiptoeing to reach inside. Her tongue was pressed against her lip as she fished around blindly, finally pulling away with a large black iron key. Turning back to the street, she held it out to Ludmilla. "My lady, what?" "These will be your accommodations in the city," Lady Sheltier told her, "for as long as you require them." "Well, they're actually the quarters that were allocated to me since I'm often called to perform duties here, but I haven't used this place at all. I can return to my own home rather quickly, as you might have surmised." Ludmilla received the key, feeling its weight in her palm. The guest houses in the central district were quite expensive to rent out. It was actually much cheaper to frequent the merchant inns out in the common sections of the city, and nobles with little in the way of discretionary wealth often resorted to using them. "Once I settle the barony's goods, my lady," she lowered her head, "I will pay you back for the rent." "There's no need for that," Lady Sheltier waved her hand lazily. "It's free for me to use anyways." "Thank you for your generosity, Lady Sheltier." When she rose again, she found herself face to face with Lady Sheltier, and it took all of her will to not jump back in alarm. If Lady Sheltier sensed what had almost happened, she gave no indication of being offended by it. "Surely you didn't follow me halfway around Rantle just to gape at my face," Lady Sheltier said. "If we would speak at length, it hardly seems appropriate for young ladies to be standing outside in the dead of night." She was right, and Ludmilla had found herself once again committing a faux pas in the presence of a royal courtier. Fumbling with the key in embarrassment, she walked quickly through the front yard of the guest manor to its ornately carved door, turning the lock. With a soft click, it swung inwards, opening into a small foyer where she saw her bags had been deposited in plain view near the entrance. Breathing a sigh of relief at one less thing to worry about, she stepped inside and looked around for a lamp. "What are you doing?" Lady Sheltier's query floated in from outside the door. Ludmilla poked her head out of a closet further down the corridor. "I am looking for a lamp, my lady," she replied. "Or a lantern, or something similar to help light the house." "But you don't actually need it, do you?" Ludmilla's hands ceased their searching, and she stepped out of the closet again to look at Lady Sheltier with an uncomprehending expression on her face. "Beings with true sight do not need light to see," Lady Sheltier answered the question on her face with a matter-of-fact statement. Ludmilla closed the box she had been rifling through, placing it back into the closet. "You are aware of my talent?" she said carefully. "Of course," Lady Sheltier replied. "Momon did mention it clearly in his report to the Guardian Overseer. Well, since it is a talent, he wasn't sure whether it was exactly the same or not. Actually." Lady Sheltier stretched out her arm towards her, and an exquisite rod of clear crystal materialized in her grasp. "True seeing. Well, what do you see?" Ludmilla opened her eyes, having flinched when she felt the spell being abruptly cast on her. She turned her head to look around for a minute, finally bringing her gaze back to Lady Sheltier. "Nothing," Ludmilla said. "I mean, nothing has changed, my lady. Everything looks like it usually does." "And so you have it." Lady Sheltier nodded as the rod vanished again, though there are some distinct differences between a spell that emulates true sight and the sense of those that have it naturally. It should basically function in much the same manner. While they spoke, the scent of rain drifted in from outdoors. Looking beyond the yard outside, Ludmilla saw tiny droplets starting to fall. "Please come inside, my lady," she motioned to her liege, who was still standing at the door. "It will not do for someone of your standing to become soaked outside." Lady Sheltier tentatively stepped into the manor and, when she found herself fully inside, smiled to herself for some reason. Ludmilla picked up her bags and carried them further into the manor, committing the layout to memory as she walked through its halls. She pondered over how her talent worked. Ludmilla had always thought the others in the village could see as well as she did, or perhaps she just had slightly better vision than the rest. Activity around the rural village revolved around the availability of daylight. Even border patrols established camp in the evenings. Her assumption had been that it was simply how humans behaved, working during the day and sleeping at night, and so she did the same. She had never realized that she had a talent while she grew up in Warden's Vale, but now that it had come to light, she had become more and more curious about its potential. The manor was much larger than she had initially thought, with a large patio in the center of the building around which the corridors leading to the manor's various chambers ran. A flight of stone steps ran up one side of the courtyard, presumably to the residents' private rooms upstairs. Ludmilla slowly walked around the open space of the ground floor, looking into each door as the pitter-patter of raindrops on the patio accompanied her steps. After going past several doors, she found what she had been looking for, the main hall of the manor, though it had been converted into something more along the lines of a large drawing room to entertain guests. She stepped inside and looked about the richly furnished space. Its drapes had been drawn closed and, though it had all the furnishings of a wealthy noble's manor, the polished surfaces of its tables and shelves lay bare. There was a puff sound behind her. Ludmilla turned to see that Lady Shiltier had followed her to the room and was now settling onto a long sofa positioned near the fireplace with its empty hearth. Seeing this, Ludmilla moved to see if she could get a flame started. "Now what are you doing?" Lady Shiltier spoke from where she was reclining, stopping Ludmilla over 10 paces from the fireplace. "I was going to start a fire to warm up the room, my lady," Ludmilla answered. "Come here and sit down." Her liege's tone brooked no argument. Ludmilla turned around and headed back to where Lady Shiltier was reclining. Selecting a large chair which was set to face the others, Ludmilla placed her bags on the floor beside it. As she seated herself, she registered figures moving around them. 4 skeletons, complete with arms and armor, materialized from the ground. Ludmilla immediately rose in alarm, but Lady Shiltier, lying across from her, made no move, nor did she seem to even care. 2 of the skeletons walked over to where the fireplace was. One walked back and forth from the rack of firewood nearby, piling logs in the fireplace, while the other stood guard with the fire iron in hand for some reason. After a half-dozen logs had been neatly arranged on the hearth, the skeleton stopped and Lady Shiltier, still reclining on the couch, raised her arm, holding her palm out towards the ceiling. "Flame strike!" With a tumultuous roar, a column of flame streaked down through the chimney and into the logs arranged the fireplace. The 2 skeletons standing by the fireplace were simultaneously blown apart and incinerated as the flames struck the hearth and exploded. The fire iron was sent whistling end over end until it buried itself in the couch just above where Lady Shiltier was reclining. Ludmilla, already on edge when the undead had mysteriously appeared, leapt over the arm of her couch at the sound and remained behind her cover against the flaming debris landing all over the room. After the chunks of wood and stone stopped raining down around them, she thought she heard an oops drift quietly over the sofa. Peeking over the armrest, Ludmilla was fairly certain that the word did not come close to describing what had happened. The large fireplace had crumbled apart below its mantelpiece, and the polished stone floor in a 3-meter radius around the hearth was scorched and shattered. The remaining 2 skeletons were running around frantically, scooping up flaming bits of wood and tossing them into the pile of rubble that was once an extravagant showpiece of the hall. One stopped to try to beat out a fire that had caught on the drapes nearest to the disaster. As the flames licked their way up the fabric, the skeleton gave up on its attempts and tore the entire thing down, tossing it over the flaming pile of what remained of the hearth. Ludmilla wondered how many gold coins had just gone up in smoke. She waved her hand in front of her face as she coughed, trying to clear away the traces of smoke lingering in the air before her. As she went to air out the room by opening the now draperless window, she heard Lady Shiltier speaking on the sofa. "Yes. No. Yes, that was me. Why, our fireplaces don't do that. No, you don't have to send anyone over. It's fine." I said this is fine. Unable to stifle her curiosity, Ludmilla turned around to look behind her but couldn't see who Lady Shiltier was speaking to. "That girl? You mean Baroness Zaradnik? She's okay, she's..." Lady Shaltir stretched her neck to peek around the fire iron which remained impaled in the couch above her supine form. Alive. Of course she's alive, you don't have to sound so disappointed when I say that. Ludmilla turned back around and checked herself over after she opened the windows. Aside from some splinters and soot stuck to her skirt, nothing appeared to be amiss. Outside, she could see several of the tall sentinels that she had encountered around the city gathered on the street in front of the manor, the crimson points of light in their eyes looking towards her. She tried waving them away like someone might have waved off a militia member looking into a disturbance, but they ignored her and continued to stand on the pavement being pelted by the rain. She turned back just in time to see Lady Shaltir roll off the couch, brushing her dress off after getting up. Lady Shaltir eyed the fireplace poker embedded halfway into the couch with a frown, grasped the handle, and gave it a firm yank. The instrument came out in a single motion, but the prong had hooked onto the contents of the cushioned backrest, pulling out a long trail of stuffing behind it. With an expression that looked somewhere between displeasure and embarrassment, she flicked the wrought iron instrument in the direction of the destroyed fireplace, where it buried itself in the pile of flaming rubble all the way to its hilt. The cleric waved her right hand in a dismissive gesture, and the two remaining skeletons dematerialized where they stood. She turned to face Ludmilla, not quite looking her in the eye. "Do you think there's any tea in the kitchen?" As it turned out, there was no tea in the kitchen. Ludmilla looked through the empty pantry for a few minutes before deciding that since there was no expectation of anyone living in the manor, it had just not been prepared for residents. In the end, she couldn't even find any teacups, dishes or utensils anywhere either, so Ludmilla ended up fishing out 2 wooden cups from her baggage. Now they were sitting across from one another over a kitchen counter, nursing their cups of river water which had been drawn before her departure from Warden's Vale. Long minutes passed with the sound of rain filtering into the kitchen, and Ludmilla quietly worried over whether her actions constituted as being a gracious host, or an insulting one. Lady Shaltir broke the lull between them first, rubbing her nose and checking her fingers for soot. "So, do you have any questions?" she asked. "Is there anything else that you require beyond accommodations in the city?" Ludmilla looked up from her cup of water. On the other side of the counter, both appearances seemed to be waiting expectantly. "Then, do you know what my talent actually does, my lady?" she asked. The adventurer Moman, of darkness, seemed to recognize what it was, but we parted before I was able to ask. She decided to start with something that Lady Shaltir seemed to be familiar with rather than dumping a whole pile of her domain-related problems onto her lap all at once. Due to the calamity in the hall, the air of tense formality between them had dissipated by a large degree. Ludmilla thought it might be a good opportunity to develop an understanding of the powerful woman on a more personal level. "True sight is one of the most potent sensory abilities known," Lady Shaltir said. "Since you were born with it, I suppose its use should come to you as naturally as any of your other senses. As you already know, it allows you to see through darkness, but not only the absence of light, it also sees through visual obscurement maintained through magical means." She extended her arm towards the doorway leading to the courtyard and cast a spell. Darkness. Inky blackness smothered the opening, but, while Ludmilla saw it appear, she simultaneously saw through it as clearly as if it was not there. Normally, Lady Shaltir told her, humans will only see a wall of darkness in the doorway, but you should be able to see plainly through it. Ludmilla nodded, and the cleric continued her explanation. True sight will foil all magical or supernatural forms of visual deception in your eyes, even if they aren't explicitly targeted at you. Invisibility, optical illusions, shape-shifting, even the most subtle alterations of form by magic, will all be laid bare to your sight. They should appear to you just as I do right now. Lady Shaltir smiled, which was simultaneously dazzling and terrifying. Ludmilla offered no overt reaction, and Lady Shaltir pouted a bit before speaking again. "You are prudent to limit the awareness of others to your ability," she said. "Vampires like myself don't particularly care whether we are seen or not, unless it compromises some other purpose, but races whose natural advantages are linked to their ability to alter or conceal their forms would probably react to you as a threat." Recalling Nobbe earlier in the evening, Ludmilla was forced to agree. While Ludmilla's talent seemed more wondrous as she learned about it, in the end she was only human, and perception in the face of overwhelming violence would do little in light of her relative weakness. Since you've been born with true sight as one of your natural senses, the usual magical means of defeating it will not work. Counter-divination spells, items that protect against scrying and anti-illusion magic, even the most powerful forms of visual deception reliant on magical or supernatural powers, those that your people would consider the realm of the gods, are powerless against your ability. Ludmilla swallowed. Her own talent was beginning to scare her. She raised her cup to moisten her throat before asking a question. "Then how do you fight true sight, my lady?" she asked. "Is there anything I need to be careful of?" "Why, of course." Lady Sheltier pointed a finger at her. "Blindness." The noble woman cried out in surprise as the world turned dark. The wooden cup fell out of Ludmilla's hands, but she didn't hear it clatter to the table or the floor. "If someone can rob you of your vision in ways that true sight does not defeat," Lady Sheltier told her, "then you become as blind as anyone else that has lost their sight. If a thought is planted in your mind that you cannot confirm with your own eyes, say a smell, or a sound, then, obviously, your ability will not save you. It is something that is bound to your vision. After all, it's a bit unsatisfying how quickly you become calm, you know? Remove blindness." Ludmilla apologized, wondering whether it was something to actually apologize over. "I am sorry, my lady," she said. "I was trying to pay attention to what you were saying." Blinking several times after her vision was restored, she realized that Lady Sheltier might have a bit of a sadistic streak, or at the least she seemed to enjoy teasing her. Ludmilla located her cup, which had been placed to the side, and reached out to nurse it in her hands again as she continued listening. "There should be some other things you should have put together by now," Lady Sheltier continued. "True sight doesn't let you see through walls or clothing, so any sort of conjuration that produces something real will obscure your vision, even though they were originally created through magic. But while you may not be able to see the face behind someone's mask or cloak or armor, mundane tricks that rely on light to deceive observers will probably not work on you, since you do not require light to see." Lady Sheltier produced a long, white silk glove from somewhere. As she pulled it over her hand, Ludmilla furrowed her brow as Lady Sheltier's elongated fingers seemed to shorten and conform to the shape of the glove. The rest of her hand followed as she finished putting on the glove, with no sign of what Ludmilla had witnessed before. Such an obvious thing did not actually occur to her. Clothing and physical barriers were a normal part of her life, and she did not really treat it as a special sort of exception in the short time that she had become aware of her talent. Finally, just because you see the true form of others does not mean you can also always deny other guises they may assume. Lady Sheltier's ungloved hand reached out to grasp her wrist. The grotesque appendage with its elongated fingers and wicked talons did not touch her. Instead it was the delicate, carefully manicured hand that lightly rested its cool fingers on her skin. "A polymorphed creature will interact with you according to its current physical form," Lady Sheltier told her. "Just because you see that your enemy is a mouse turned into a bear doesn't mean it will not maul you. A human druid transformed into a manticore will still injure you when it hurls its spikes, and the venom will affect you all the same. Similarly, the reverse is true. The hand around your wrist may appear to be a false form, but it is real all the same, and the nails of my true form will not dig into your flesh as I do so." Ludmilla made a mental note, and asked her next question after seeing that Lady Sheltier had completed her explanation. "How can I combat the methods of defeating true sight that you've described?" Ludmilla asked. Lady Sheltier released Ludmilla's wrist, brushing her cheek lightly with her fingers as she pondered. Well, there are various potions and items that will defend against or remedy these problems, though you will have to discover if they are sold locally here. As for those mundane things, I suppose it will be a test of your skills of perception." As she spoke the last, a gleam formed in her crimson eyes and her lips curved upwards in a slight smile. "What?" "I think I'm beginning to agree with what Momon said at the meeting today," Lady Sheltier said. Ludmilla straightened herself, waiting to hear what had been said about her before the royal court. "While you are human and certainly react in human ways," Lady Sheltier said, "you are very different from most of your kind that I have witnessed. When presented with the things that they fear, most will avoid it, they will cower and hide, or they will run. A few, perhaps brave, foolish or mad, would thoughtlessly stand up to their fears, perhaps on behalf of another or for some intangible ideal. Not many would act as you do. In the face of things that you should fear, you do not seek a way to escape such an encounter. Instead you ask questions, analyze, plan. Even your polite manner of speech has faded away as your true nature unveils itself. In the end, you look to attack and defeat the very things that would defeat you. As weak as you are like us, in various ways. If Cocytus were here, I suppose he would go on about it being the way of a warrior or some such nonsense, but amongst all of the humans I have come across, the only one that behaved as you do was not one of your pitiful warriors, or even those so-called adventurers. I do not know who Cocytus is, my lady, Ludmilla replied, but I think that sounds about right. The way you describe it, it seems to very much be something like a warrior's mindset. When you are what stands between your opponent and their objective, then you must do your utmost to prevail. Well, it wasn't, Lady Shiltia said. He was a merchant, if you can imagine that. To be sure he was startled when he arrived and found the city to be occupied by the undead, but he recovered quickly and was quite infuriated that his business had been disrupted. He turned the city upside down looking for ways to keep his trade going, until Sabos finally came out to deal with him and sent him on his way. That merchant was quite the wonder. It made us curious why the rest of you humans couldn't just all do the same. Lady Shiltia pulled on a second silken glove and folded her hands on the counter before her. Her light, conversational voice took on a more serious tone. Moman has suggested that you might be able to solve some of the problems currently plaguing Erantal, she said. As you have seen tonight, the citizens cower in their homes. They will only come out when they need to, and when they see that Moman is in the city. That Gorhem, the guardian overseer, does not understand humans, and only deigns to deal with them up to the point where she believes that useful ones can be encouraged. She has a mind of order and duty, an endless stream of numbers and rules, a plethora of plots and schemes and mechanisms that drive the gears of what she envisions our master's realm to be. She believes that the citizens should feel safe when they are told that they are. That they should work when told to work, eat when they are told to eat, and die when they are told to die. You do not think the same, my lady? Ludmilla asked tentatively. If His Majesty declared this to be the case, Lady Shiltia said simply, then it must surely be so. But he has not. In fact, it's precisely the opposite. Erantal has been allowed to keep its laws and his vassals have been given free rein to administer as they see fit. This would mean that he trusts us to govern in accordance with his decisions with as much flexibility as is necessary, yes? Ludmilla thought on her words. Countess Jesn had also said something along the lines of Erantal retaining its crown and ducal laws, but she had not heard anything about the king's cabinet having a free hand over the nation. It was an unheard of amount of freedom that she did not think any reigning sovereign would willingly tolerate. Lady Shiltia continued as Ludmilla pondered the sorcerer king's decision. At any rate, Lady Shiltia continued, if there's anything you can do to help get things moving again, or if there's anything you need from me in order to do so, just let me know. If it gets us even 1 millimeter closer to fulfilling His Majesty's desires, I'll be more than happy to do what I can to help. My specialty lies in battle, so the most I can probably do is to help ensure no one gets in the way of your work. Beyond that, I know little about taxes or industry or the citizens or whatever else that goes into all this. Surely you can't mean that, my lady, Ludmilla responded incredulously. All those people in that alley, they were clearly moved by your words. Lady Shiltia tilted her head curiously. Is that so? We deliver supplies to many parts of the city like that every day, though? I only decided to speak after you said you thought I was ministering to the people, and even then, I only repeated the Sorcerer King's desires for his new realm. If that's all you truly think that you did, Ludmilla said, then you must be gifted beyond belief. Hundreds of people were enthralled by your words and actions by the time you finished. The vampire across the counter fidgeted with her wooden cup. Suppose what you say is true. She drew out her words. I didn't exactly tell them to do anything. What do you think might have even come out of it? I do not know, Ludmilla replied. Maybe all the people needed was more reassurance. What follows might just come on its own. The ringing of a bell somewhere near the room interrupted their conversation. Ludmilla turned her head at the sound, looking out the kitchen doorway. Large manors had offices that were normally staffed by hired or personal maids. Several bells would be in that office, which were activated from various parts of the house and used to signal the staff on duty. However, as the house was previously unoccupied, no such staff were in attendance. The bell sounded again, coming through the corridors from the room across the courtyard. As Ludmilla rose to answer, she felt a cool, silk-clad hand reach out and grasp her wrist. Wait. Ludmilla looked back at Lady Shultier, who had switched to low tones for some reason. Before she could ask for an explanation, she heard the sound of someone landing on the patio with a light splash. Soon after, footsteps came from somewhere out of sight, accompanied by the sound of the rain. The trepidation shown by Lady Shiltier created an ominous feeling as the sound approached. Baroness Zaradnik? Yuri Alpha's voice echoed through the empty courtyard and through the halls. Baroness Zaradnik, Yuri Alpha called again, are you here? Are you all right? The maid's tall figure came in front of the kitchen door and stopped. What in the world is, Baroness Zaradnik, are you inside? It occurred to Ludmilla that Yuri Alpha could not see through the darkness spell that covered the door. Yes? She replied uneasily, yes, I'm here. Oh, thank goodness, the royal maid said. Would you have happened to see Lady Shultier? Ludmilla turned to look back at her liege, who shook her head vehemently in reply. Lady Shultier? She's, As Ludmilla hesitated, Lady Shiltier slid off of her stool and onto her feet. Greater teleportation. Damn it. During the commotion, Yuri Alpha dove into the darkened doorway, rolled over the tiles and rose to her feet with her fists held out before her in a fighting stance. Her eyes went from Ludmilla, to Lady Shiltier, and then to the vampire's hand gripping Ludmilla's wrist. Following her gaze, Lady Shiltier quickly released her hold and hid her hand behind the counter. The maid narrowed her eyes suspiciously. Lady Shiltier, did you just try to teleport away with Lady Zaradnik? Why is the doorway shrouded in darkness? Yuri asked. Just what were you trying to do to the girl in here? There's a good reason for all this, The vampire tried to explain herself, but the maid had relaxed her posture and turned to speak gently to Ludmilla. You'll be all right, Lady Zaradnik, Yuri Alpha said in soothing tones. His Majesty desires that all of his subjects should live safely under his protection. It's just that Lady Shiltier gets a little bit excited sometimes. As Lady Shiltier sputtered, Yuri Alpha continued on in her comforting voice. Sitting in a pitch-dark kitchen drinking tepid water is not something a lady of your station should be doing, Baroness, she said. I've brought a few maids along with me, as well as a pair of sentries for your lodgings. I'll have them bring your things to the solar and have a hot bath prepared. We'll have you changed into a fresh dress and there will be a warm meal delivered. Ludmilla perked up at the offer. Thoroughly exhausted after being thrown from one unfamiliar situation to another throughout the day, it did sound very enticing. Lady Shiltier did not miss her reaction. What are you turning on me for a hot bath? Lady Shiltier exclaimed, traitor. Her brows furrowed for a moment, then her expression brightened again. Wait. I can give you all that as well, I think? You will not be giving Baroness Zaradnik a bath, Yuri Alpha said flatly. But arg. Why am I the bad one here? You're not? Yuri Alpha arched an eyebrow. I received a curious report from one of the Death Knights returning from their patrol. Apparently a column of fire came down in the middle of a rainstorm, right into this very manor. I do sincerely hope nothing of His Majesty's city was damaged. Lady Shiltier shrank behind the counter. How mysterious, I wonder how that happened. Yuri Alpha sniffed, adjusting her spectacle frames. Indeed. I'll let in the maids now and have the Death Knights help clean up before they take on their sentry duties. We might need someone for the roof as well, seeing how easily I was able to enter. The maid made a precise turn and left the kitchen, heading towards the manor entrance. Ludmilla looked back at the defeated Lady Shultier, who had laid her cheek on the cold stone counter. Seeing her glance back in her direction, Lady Shiltier spoke in a deflated tone. Well, what are you waiting for? She didn't raise her head. Go refresh yourself, I'll be waiting down here.